My friends, welcome. Today is the final day of Chol HaMoed. Tonight is the beginning of the 7th day of Pesach. And on the 8th day of Pesach, for us outside of Israel, of course, we recite Yizkor. We've arranged this Zoom Yizkor today for those who are unable to attend in person, those who are uncomfortable to attend in person, and we respect people are being very careful to protect their health and the health of others. Permit me to share with you a brief idea just for a couple of minutes, and then we will begin the Yizkor service. On Passover, we make fun of Paro. What a silly king Paro is. The plague comes and he agrees to free the Jews. And when the plague ends, he reneges on his promise. Silly king. You think God's going to forget? You think that if God can turn water into blood, he can't do worse? You don't see what's coming? Silly King Paro, as you suffer from one plague to the next, don't you remember what happened last week when you were suffering from the previous plague? Did you think that Moshe was just kidding? Did you think that it was a bluff? Silly king. And look where your silliness leads you. Right into the sea, with your entire army drowned. When we make fun of Paro in this manner, we are hypocrites, because all too often we are Paro. How many of us, after learning a certain lesson, maybe observe it for a certain amount of time, and then we start to ignore it? How many of us hear a warning from a doctor or from some other expert in what we should be doing, and maybe we take it seriously for a short amount of time, and then it seems that we forget it? How many of us learn an important lesson about what we should be doing and maybe put it into effect once or twice, but then after a short amount of time passes, we go back to the way we were? How many of us are really Paro? My friend Abe Medris points out that Paro is a man with no memory. His experience of the world is wholly an experience of the now. When he's frightened of God, he follows God. When things get better, he forgets that he's frightened of God. How many of us could be described the same way? And because Paro is a man with no memory, Paro cannot make promises. Paro cannot tie what he must do to what has happened. He cannot understand how the past obligates him. So we need to be careful about making fun of Paro, because the antithesis of Paro is not us. All too often we are similar to Paro in this regard. The antithesis to Paro is God. The Torah tells us God heard the groaning of the children of Israel in Egypt, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham and with Yizkor and with Yaakov to bring his people to the land. Because God remembers the covenant, God frees the children of Israel from slavery. Going free on Passover means leaving behind the human nature of Paro and letting our memory be joined with God's memory. to remember, and because of remembering, to make promises and to keep those promises. That's the challenge of Yizkor. It's not so hard to remember, though some memories are painful and sad. But that in itself is not Yizkor. Remembering by itself is not Yizkor. That's memory. That's nostalgia. Yizkor is remembering with a challenge. Yizkor is work. Yizkor is joining our memory to God's memory so that the memories become promises. What kind of father or mother do I want to become as a result of remembering my father or my mother? What lessons will we learn when we remember those we love in order to make our lives more meaningful? How will our lives be different because we remember our grandparents, our spouses, others that we love? How will we emulate those we love? How will we be different by our remembering? That is the challenge of Yizkor. And that is the kind of Yizkor that leads to freedom. It leads to freedom from the human nature of Paro. It leads to freedom of just remembering but doing nothing about it. This is the kind of Yizkor that separates us from Paro. And this is the Yizkor we will now say today. I invite you to join me on the first page of the prayers. And again, the link to the prayers is in the chat. And we will say the first lines on the top right-hand side responsively. Adonai, Madam Vatedoeu, Venenosh Tichashvehu. Adam Lahevel Dama, Yamav Kitzel Over, Baboker Yatzitz V'chalav, Le'erev Yemolel V'yavesh. Limnos Yameinu Keinoda, V'navi Levav Chachma. Shemarta Morei Yashar, Ki acharis liish shalom. Ach Elohim yivte nafshi miyad shol, Ki kocheini selah. Kala she'eri levavi, Tzuri levavi, V'chelki Elohim liolam. V'yashav ha'afar al haaretz kishahaya, V'haruach tashuv el ha'Elohim asher nisana. May the memories of those we recall today have an aliyah, and may their memory bless our lives today and every day going forward. I want to wish each of you a very beautiful Shabbos and a Yom Tov, Shabbat Shalom, Chag Sameach.